Welcome to the Tuesday, November 14th, 2023 regular closed session meeting of the EBMUD Board of Directors. Director April Chan is absent and excused. Roll call, Madam Secretary.
Director Coleman.
Present.
Director McIntosh.
Here.
Director Linney.
Here.
Director Patterson.
Here.
Director Young.
Here.
President Katz.
Here. We move on to public comment. If members of the public are online and wish to speak on agenda or non-agenda items, please use the raise your hand feature in Zoom. Comments on non-agenda items will be heard now, and comments on agenda items will also be heard now when the item is up for consideration. Madam Secretary, are there any public comments online?
I have one hand for public comment. Yvette, you should be able to unmute your mic.
Thank you, Risha.
Your 3 minutes are going to start now, and I'll give you the 30-second warning.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
This morning, I played the audio recordings of Lourdes Matthews, Assistant General Counsel, gaslighting Director Coleman during the retirement question period. I played it because Director Linney, it felt like to me that he kept on misrepresenting that I altered recordings. So if anyone wants to hear it, you can hear those recordings from the 10:15 meeting. I sent this board a memo from the Honorable Barry Baskin, presiding judge from the Superior Court of Contra Costa. He talks about how the Contra Costa County Court joined the Supreme Court of California in recognizing their moral and ethical obligation to confront racism and injustice, and that they, as individuals, would go ahead and, as a court and as members, would ensure a just society may give life to the ideals of equality and inclusion. He went on to say that in any of its forms, conscious or unconscious, historic or ongoing, systemic or individualized racism subverts the principle of equal justice under the law on which our judicial system is built. And for those of you that don't know, in the Saji Pierce and Ariel Bland lawsuit, Craig Spencer was found through an investigation to have engaged in racial bias, unconscious bias. And even one of our directors, Director Marguerite Young, stated in a deposition that, which of course is her opinion and was the judge's opinion, that everyone has some level of unconscious racial bias or bias. And I've been in government service for almost 40 years. And I just want to say that in government service, you're supposed to check your racial, your racism, your misogyny, everything at the door before you walk into the workplace. So I hope that East Bay MUD will take a good look, East Bay MUD directors, not the General Counsel's office, because I have no faith in them, but East Bay MUD directors will take a good look at that memo that I sent to you from the Superior Court of California that lists the values that I just stated, and somehow that East Bay MUD adopts the same thing and follows Contra Costa Court's
You have
lead on
15
this.
seconds.
Thank you. I yield.
Thank you.
I yield. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Rivera, you commented that you sent the board the memo that you just referenced, and the email you actually sent was a mask email. Boardmembers@ebmud.com does not exist, and so I will be forwarding that information to the board, but the email
Thank you. I
that you
appreciate it.
responded to, it did not get to the board today.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. It's just an image of the memo from Superior Court Honorable Barry Baskin that references unconscious and conscious systemic racism. Thank you. I appreciate it.
So I think that it is important to note that in the Pierce Bland matter, none of the plaintiff's claims of discrimination were upheld by the jury.
The next speaker is Joey Smith, followed by Eric Larson.
Morning.
My name is Joey Smith. Today I am speaking as an employee and as a consumer and ratepayer for EBMUD. Many years ago, I participated in several events with schools, career days. We used to have a very active public information office and community affairs group. Not that they aren't now, it's just that we're not involved with children like we used to be. And I'm looking forward to the new employee who is due to come shortly. Today I'm dressed in purple because in 1960, on November 14th, Ruby Bridges was a very brave 6-year-old child who walked into a segregated elementary school as a lone black child, breaking that because the law said. She wasn't supposed to be alone, but unfortunately she was. And she is a hero to a lot of young students. There are a lot of schools that even this wonderfully diverse East Bay would have kept her from, and many of the other students of color and immigrants who are here now. Today is the Ruby Bridges Walk to School Day. It has been a law in California since, well, I don't know if it's a law, but anyway, it's been a thing since 2021. It actually passed. And there are several elementary schools who have been participating in this. I was fortunate enough to hear about it for today. And I look forward to EBMUD being able to more closely work with the schools like we used to, because a lot of the students don't even realize that it is a possibility for a career. It's one of the reasons why I stay real close to the community, because even though I wasn't born and raised in the Bay Area, Richmond is my adopted home, and I grew up here at EBMUD, and I want everyone to know that there's an opportunity to have a good career and maybe even be able to buy a house. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Joey. Director Coleman?
Question for Clifford. Thank you, Joey, for the presentation. Dang mask is muffling my voice. I know the pandemic really impacted our ability to go to schools. The schools didn't want us going to the schools, I suspect, because of the number of children in the classroom and the pandemic and the number of schools weren't operating. When are we expecting to reach out again to go back to the schools, do our water education and everything else? Because I've heard from, ironically, a number of ratepayers go, my child told me not to keep the faucet running when I'm raising. Turn off the faucet when you're brushing your teeth. And the kids are great at educating their parents. So when are we looking at actually getting back into the schools doing that again?
Yep, we've already started reaching out to schools. I'm going to continue into next year. As you're aware, Catherine Horn was brought on to lead the education program. There's another position that the board had authorized that's also going to support the education program. Those interviews are going to be happening shortly. So you're going to see more activities with the schools beginning in early next year.
Thank you.
Director Linney?
I was just going to comment that, Joey, thank you for that, and you probably know this, but in Alameda, we have a school named after Ruby Bridges. We have an elementary school there. I didn't know about Ruby Bridges until my wife taught there for a bit, and so I'm glad to know that we have one school where certainly all the kids will learn about Ruby Bridges, because that's always what happens when a school's named after them. So anyway.
Thank you, Joey. I look forward to hearing about this on agenda in terms of our engagement with schools to enhance STEM education, especially for DEI enhancement. We move on to the next speaker, Eric Larson.
Good morning. Thank you, President Katz and board members and General Manager. I wanted to take an opportunity to come before you with a follow-up on the security concerns that I've brought before you over the past few months, and to say that we are now regularly meeting with the General Manager Clifford Chan, Director Dave Briggs, and Manager of Security David Cook to continue to address the ongoing security concerns. We are seeing security staffing on site on the night work and moving of resources from securing assets to providing security and safety for our members who are out there in the street. So I just wanted to acknowledge that we're making progress, and to thank you for your attention to this matter, and the General Manager for his real sincere attention to addressing the dangers of working out in the street. So thank you.
Thank you. We will, are there any other speakers for public comment?
No other speakers for public comment?
All right, we will now convene to conference room 8 to discuss closed session agenda items. We are scheduled to return for the regular meeting at 1:15 PM. Welcome to the Tuesday, November 14th, 2023 regular business meeting of the EBMUD Board of Directors. We will receive reports from this morning's Planning and Sustainability Committees under item 14. Director April Chan is absent and excused. Roll call, Madam Secretary.
Director Coleman?
Present.
Director Lenny is on his way. Director McIntosh? Here. Director Patterson? Here. Director McIntosh? I'm sorry, Director Young? Here. President Katz?
Here. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
There are no announcements from closed session. We begin with a presentation, and the first one will be our annual presentation honoring EBMUD veterans. Mr. General Manager.
Thank you, President Katz. So in recognition of Veterans Day, which was observed on November 10th this year, I'd like to begin our meeting today to honor those employees and board members who have demonstrated their commitment to our country and the district. We thank you for your protection of our liberties we enjoy in this country and your continued stewardship of the community's natural resources. We will begin with a presentation honoring all active district employees who are United States veterans.
It is. So just click yes. No. I was just going to click it forward. Is that okay?
So we have a pin and certificate to honor the service for all of our veterans, some of whom have taken the time to join us in the boardroom today. When I call your name, please come up to the front of the boardroom to receive your pin and certificate from Director Patterson. So I'll start with Demetrius Broussard. Adrian Gonzalez. Rolando Gonzalez. Alfred Green. Isaiah Hinton. Dennis Garriam. And Jeffrey Toon. And presenting Director Patterson with his pin and certificate is President Katz. So I also want to thank those of you attending today's meeting virtually who are currently serving or have served in the military. Thank you all for attending today's presentation. Those who are not in attendance will receive their certificate and pin shortly following this meeting. Thank you again.
Clifford?
Yes.
There's only one job name up there I didn't recognize. What is Chief of Party?
It's the happiest job. No, they lead our survey crews.
Okay. I said, I've never seen that in all the budget stuff or anything else.
So you're not only are you the chief of party, but the initials is COP. So
Okay.
okay.
All right, well, yeah, thank you for the service for all of our EBMUD veterans. We move on to public comment. If,
We have one more presentation. Sorry.
excuse me, we service award recipients, thank you.
Yes. So the district values the individual and collective contributions of employees and recognizes that staff longevity is a key factor in providing high-quality water and wastewater services for our customers. Employee longevity milestones are acknowledged every 5 years of service. Between July 1st and September 30th, 89 district employees reached service award milestones ranging from 5 to 40 years of service. This group of employees include 1 employee celebrating 40 years of service, 2 employees achieving 30 years of service, and 6 employees with 25 years of service. Some of the recipients are joining us on Zoom, and I will call them out. First is Associate Electrical Engineer Angela Curtis with 20 years of service. Ranger Supervisor Tim Cox with 25 years of service. and Information Systems Administrator 2, Mark Foley, with 30 years of service. I and the district would like to thank these employees for their years of service and their commitment to East Bay MUD. Thank you very much.
All right, we move on to public comment. If members of the public are online and wish to speak on agenda or non-agenda items, please use the raise your hand feature in Zoom. Comments on non-agenda items will be heard now, and comments on agenda items will be heard when the item is up for consideration. After I take speakers online, we will take the speaker cards for speakers in the room, unless there's a particular order. I do believe I will actually, one of the speaker cards, I believe, may be the lead speaker for others in a group. So I will actually take that speaker first, and then we'll call speakers online. So so I do encourage anybody online who wishes to make public comment to use the raise your hand feature in Zoom. And first I will call Lucinda Reinold.
Thank you very much, Andy. And thank you all. My name is Lucinda Reinold, and I live at 1306 Euclid Avenue in Berkeley.
Can I ask you to pause for one moment?
Sure.
Can you please check the mics? And the speaker is on. So I just got a note that the audio, there was no audio. Okay, thank you. Okay.
Shall I repeat, or?
Yes, please.
Okay, my name is Lucinda Reinold. I live at 1306 Euclid Avenue in Berkeley, and I represent the Berryman Neighbors, or Berryman Reservoir Neighbors Group. It's a group of community members who came together to protest the construction of a huge cell tower on East Bay MUD's Berryman Reservoir. And I'd really like to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. We actually appeared before you several years ago, you may remember, and have returned to ask you again to terminate the lease that East Bay MUD granted to Verizon in 2018. And this was to construct a 50 to 70-foot cell tower on East Bay MUD's Berryman Reservoir on Euclid Avenue. The termination clause, which is now activated, as it's been 5 years since the signing, allows East Bay MUD to inform Verizon that you will not renew the lease after 3 years. And we sincerely hope that you will do this. So by way of background, just to remind you, the lease required Verizon to obtain a building permit from the city of Berkeley. And in 2020, after a lot of community input, the city denied Verizon the permit. Verizon then turned around and sued the city. Then our group of neighbors joined with the city as a party to that lawsuit. So no one wants this tower. The city doesn't want it, the neighbors don't want it, and those who visit the surrounding parks certainly don't want it either. We know that historically, East Bay MUD has endeavored to be a good neighbor and has really wonderful community programs, and I laud you for that. And as an example, when the reservoir was constructed, East Bay MUD, with a lot of neighborhood input and at huge expense, designed a lovely trellised walkway and landscaped the basin around the steel tank that now contains the reservoir water. As a result, the reservoir area now serves as an extension of the adjacent park. Community members use the reservoir walkway for picnics, Tai Chi lessons, dog walking, and so forth. And again, we are very grateful to East Bay MUD for this gift to the neighborhood and to the city. But now, this beautiful park-like area could be ruined by a huge industrial, ugly cell tower that will be clearly visible from all vantage points. It is just the wrong place for a cell tower. And at the outset of this situation, we and the city objected to the proposed tower for a variety of reasons, foremost of which are the environmental impact and public safety risk that this tower poses. Can I go forward?
If you can wrap up within a minute.
Yes, I think I can. So the tower will be built in a designated high fire area, and at the base of the tower will be a storage tank containing more than 100 gallons of flammable diesel fuel, very close to the reservoir tank itself. And it will also be built directly on the Hayward Fault. So if there is a major earthquake or fire, which of course there could be at any time, the consequences to the neighborhood, to the city, and to EBMUD are really frightening. Also, the reservoir is located between two historic landmarks, the Berkeley Rose Gardens and the Berkeley Rose Walk. And it will be visible again to anybody who visits those areas. And the park is the most heavily used park in Berkeley. It attracts over 100,000 visitors annually. So we understand that EBMUD has revised its policy regarding cell towers, and we think it's likely that this tower would not have been approved under the new policy. But the current lease, just to remind you, does allow EBMUD to inform Verizon now that it will not be renewed. So please, what we're asking is that you please review the lease, be a good neighbor, do the right thing for your community and for EBMUD, and notify Verizon now that the lease will be terminated according to the terms of the document. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'd like to briefly respond that I do think that the speaker raises some important concerns. We did adopt a policy that limited the conditions where we would enter into these leases, and it seems like some of the conditions on this site apply here. And if there have been circumstances that have changed because of the passage of time, that would be an important point to review the contract. So I'd like to see what our contract actually says, and if we're able to terminate without consequence, that we should apply the policy that the board adopted. So that's just, we're limited to a brief response to the public, and with that, I'd like to go to speakers online.
I have two speakers online. I have Sasha Grimm. You should be able to unmute your mic.
Yes, thank you. I am able to unmute, and I want to thank President Katz for his comments, and also my comments are largely in line with Lucinda's. I'm also here to urge the board to conduct a thorough review of the Verizon lease agreement for the Berryman facility. My name is Sasha Grimm. I'm a resident of Berkeley, and also with that critical focus on that termination clause, the action is absolutely imperative to bring the site, into alignment with the current policies. And I'm glad to hear that those changes have been made to the policies, because this has caused, considerable concern from the community. So I do want to also highlight that there are multiple stakeholders: the city of Berkeley, the Zoning Adjustment Board, the City Council, all have unanimously recognized the risks to public safety that are posed by having a cell tower at this site. And so it's really crucial to underscore that, Verizon's proposal falls short of the compliance with Berkeley Municipal Code. Regrettably, Verizon has displayed a pattern of non-compliance with our community's wishes and local ordinances. So I also want to highlight that. Instead of respecting the decisions of the community, they've resorted to these legal maneuvers in federal court to secure permits that the city has rightfully denied. And this approach is really troubling because it shows a disregard for the principles of local government governance and community welfare. And just looking into what Verizon has done in other facilities and sites, recent revelations have exposed Verizon's failure to disclose lead cables contributing to water pollution, which poses a serious environmental concern. The lack of transparency is deeply troubling, and it does call into question Verizon's commitment to environmental stewardship, which I know and appreciate is a principle and a value of East Bay MUD. Residents near Lake Tahoe have also reported contamination concerns related to a fake tree that was installed by Verizon. The proposed tower at Berryman is positioned in proximity to a drain grate that leads directly to the bay. And so I think there's also some environmental risks, to potential plastic pollution from a fake tree. So again, notably, the community, the Zoning Adjustment Board, the City Council have all expressed these apprehensions. And that's what led to the initial denial of that permit issuance and the subsequent appeal. So allowing the construction of the facility is, I believe, inconsistent with the mission of responsibly managing natural resources and safeguarding the environment. So hopefully now that this exclusive 5-year initial term of the lease is concluded, that consideration that President Katz mentioned will be done, and hopefully we can all put this to rest in consideration of the community. Thank you for hearing my comments. Appreciate it.
Next, we have Yvette Rivera. You should be able to unmute your mic.
Hi, Risha. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, and your 3 minutes start now.
Thank you. This morning, I spent the bulk of my comments talking about audio recordings that I played at the East Bay MUD retreat. I did so because Director Linney made it a point to me, as far as I'm concerned, it felt like he was disparaging what I was playing by saying that I altered the recordings. So I took the time at the sustainability meeting to play the recordings of Ms. Lourdes Matthews, Assistant General Counsel, providing a non-response to Director Coleman during a session where Director Coleman asked a simple question. At that time, I was in the boardroom and somebody turned to me laughing hysterically and said that I should have heard what Ms. Matthews said. And I went back and listened to the recording, and it pretty much was a laughable moment, because not only did she not respond to Director Coleman's question, it appeared to me that she was being belligerent about it, and she obviously misspoke. But now, if you want to hear it, it's on the Sustainability Committee meeting recording at the 13:30 mark. At the 11 o'clock meeting, I read a beautiful statement from a judge in Contra Costa County that set out a statement that said, in all of its forms, conscious or unconscious, historic or ongoing, systemic or individualized, racism subverts the principle of equal justice under the law on which our judicial system is built. I said this morning that the district should adopt some type of statement like that, because I did read in the Saji Pierce and Ariel Bland court papers that Marguerite Young stated something along the lines of everyone harboring some type of bias. And I ended my comments this morning by saying that everyone should be checking their racial, misogynistic, whatever biases at the door, because we work at a given government agency. Before I got off the line, Derek McDonald decided to gaslight what I said by saying none of the plaintiff's discrimination claims were upheld by a jury. And for those non-lawyers listening in, the jury deadlocked. And when a jury deadlocks, that also means that none of the plaintiff's claims were rejected by a jury. There may not have been a unanimous decision, but there was a decision to give both plaintiffs together $8 million. So, I want to remind this board that your general counsel still can't figure out how to hire a black female or a black male attorney, and that the district is going to have to pay interest on the $8 million, which is well over $100,000.
Ms. Rivera, your 3
I'm gonna-
minutes have concluded.
Thank you for your time, and I really hope that this board thinks twice about giving a high-level manager a service award, engaging in unconscious racial bias in the future. Thank you. I yield.
I would like to make a brief comment.
Director Young?
It is true, I was deposed and testified in the Saji Pierce Ariel Bland case, and the key word that Ms. Rivera leaves out was unconscious bias. Everyone has unconscious bias. By the keyword unconscious, one cannot leave unconscious bias anywhere but in their unconscious. They're not aware of it. And bias is, so I will leave it at that, but I would appreciate it, Ms. Rivera, if you quote, not paraphrase. Thank you.
We have no other hands for public comment.
Okay. We will now move to the consent calendar. We have one speaker card for item number 6, so I will ask for a motion to approve items 1 through 5 and item 7 and 8.
So moved.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? The motion carries. Item number 6, if we can have a brief introduction from the general manager, and then I will call the speaker.
This item here is to provide flagging services for our various construction projects, both maintenance and construction projects. This is a service that we have been providing for many, many years. And what you see here is a contract to increase the dollar amount for another year.
Okay. Public comment, Eric Larson.
Thank you. Good afternoon, President Katz, board members, and general manager. My name is Eric Larson. I'm the president of AFSCME Local 444. AFSCME 444 objects to contracting out our core bargaining unit work, including flagging. More than 10 classifications represented by AFSCME Local 444, including utility laborers, water distribution plumber 1, 2, and 3, paving raker A and B, concrete finisher 1 and 2, truck driver 2s, and heavy transport operators and others contain in their duty statements flagging and traffic control within their job description. AFSCME 444 has come to an agreement with management, and I appreciate working with the general manager on our agreement to increase staffing and reduce reliance on contracting out district civil service work for fiscal years 24 and 25, and concomitant with that agreement, we do not object to this contract per se, but will continue to engage management to evaluate spending and appropriate staffing levels, and will seek authorization for levels appropriate to address regular and routine work of the district and to reduce the district's reliance on contracting out in the next budget cycle. Thanks for taking the time to hear our concern.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. And I think that I'm really glad to hear some of the opportunities highlighted in the comments from the speaker. It's we have to proceed with the work that we've budgeted for, and but I'm really optimistic that after staff have worked with our Legislative and Human Resources Committee, that and after our budget workshop discussions, that this budget was able to reduce the FMNO contracting out so significantly. I really appreciate staff's hard work and Local 444's good cooperation to reduce the contracting out in that type of instance, and that's a real success. It's hard for us to accomplish a similar scale of a goal in the middle of our budget. But that is a goal that I'd like to fully explore before our next budget. And I'm very supportive of minimizing contracting out in the flagging area. I think it's more challenging than the FMNO for reasons that we've heard about in prior conversations. But you know, and I've in talking with the general manager, I've heard of efforts to make sure that crews are staffed in a way that we're able to reduce the use of this contract. So those are my thoughts about, how we can have more constructive discussions at committee. And I'd like to invite other members of the Legislative and Human Resources Committee to comment as well.
I appreciate, since I've been on this board, we've had the same discussion over and over and over and over again. And I'm always open to further discussions. Maybe there is a way when it comes to flagging that we can reduce the amount of contracting out. But at any rate, I'm open for the discussion and open for any new information that staff can provide.
Okay, is there a motion?
I'll move the item.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstained? The motion carries.
Thank you. Moving on, I'd like to pull item 10 and the appointment for the controller, and just move on first with the appointment of the manager of pipeline construction. So on that one, I'd like to bring to you for consideration the appointment of David Katsev as our manager of pipeline construction. David has spent the last 9 years collaborating with departments across the district to advance our pipeline rebuild program. Since the program began, we've gone from 7 crews to 13 crews, increased our annual replacement rate from 10 miles to 22.5 miles, and replaced over 150 miles of pipe. David has supported testing new pipes and fittings at the Center for Smart Infrastructure, our collaboration with UC Berkeley. He also served as the chair of the American Water Works Association's Cal Nevada Section's Pipeline Rehabilitation Committee, and will be the vice chair of the National American Water Works Association's Pipeline Rehabilitation Committee. I've personally worked with David for many years and have seen how his innovative approach has led to greater efficiencies, improved designs and materials to ensure the pipe we're putting in the ground will last for another century or more. If appointed, I know he'll continue to advance our pipeline rebuild program.
I'll move the item.
Second.
I
think Bill gave it to me.
Okay, it's been moved by Director Coleman and seconded by Director Young. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, the motion carries.
General Manager Chan, thank you very much for those comments. I too have enjoyed working with you greatly over the years. And thank you, Board of Directors, for this. I really want to take this opportunity to thank you. Thanks to the GM, thanks to the Board of Directors. It was 10 years ago that we really started the planning efforts for the rebuild program. We called it the 10 to 40 program at that time. We came to you with budgets, increases in budgets, which I know leads to increases in rates. We came to you with increases in staffing proposals, and then regular updates on how we were doing, how we were getting more efficient, what were we testing. And all along the way, you have supported that effort. As Clifford said, we've gone to 7 to 13 crews. We've more than doubled our replacement rate, 10 miles to we did 23 miles. And we have not doubled our crews, proving that, we have gotten more efficient. We're putting some of the most resilient, hazard-resilient materials in the ground today on the market through the efforts of testing and working with the Center for Smart Infrastructure. And we really created a culture of innovation, of research, and we're not stopping. That's just what we've created, and we're going to continue on in that path. So thank you for your support. Thank you for prioritizing this as an important project. We still have a lot of main breaks, as you know. We still have a lot of work left to do. We have a lot of pipe to replace. And I couldn't be more excited to jump into this next chapter and take this on. So thank you very much.
Director Young?
Some of you may recall that when I was running for the board 9 years ago, I was horrified by how long it seemed it would take us to replace our pipes and their age and condition and what seemed to be, having missed the boat and made quite a stink about it when I was running. And after getting elected, Dave and Margot Schuler and I sat down, and Dave basically walked me through the vision of what he hoped would become and has become Rebuild, which I get asked that question people do math, right? It's like you divide the numbers up and it still seems like a hell of a lot of pipe to replace and a hell of a long time to do it. And now I can give an answer that makes sense to people. The risk profile that we're doing, the acoustic logging, all of the things we're doing to make sure that we're making smart decisions about the infrastructure, the pipeline that we're replacing, is just, it's a great program. And I know you've been its champion from the get-go, and I can't imagine a better person to be in the job. So I'm looking forward to the next few years.
Director Coleman?
Thank you.
David, normally I tell people, go Bears and all that. My first 2 years were at Oregon State. Go Beavs.
All right. Go Beavs.
Congratulations. This is a very important program in terms of how do we get our job done and invest in the future in this important centennial year, as we're not just looking at the 100 years of legacy infrastructure, but the 100 years to come. So this investment and your leadership is something we look forward to. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations, David.
We move on to item number 11, the legislative update.
Yes, Kathy Viatella is here to provide the update.
Well, good afternoon, President Katz and members of the board. It's been a while since I've been before you, and it was a busy end of session. It has been a busy fall, obviously, on the federal front. And what I'm going to do today is two things. I'm going to first give an overview, our mid-session report on legislative activity on the bills that we had positions on, our priority bills. I will walk through that. I will do it categorically by subject matter. So in the back of your report, we break them down into those categories in the table. So if you want to follow along that way, it's easier to report out on them that way. And then the second part of my update is I'll talk about sort of what are legislative issues that have a nexus with the district.
So Kathy, these are the exact same bills that you were going to present a month ago, right?
Correct.
That's what I thought. I started looking at it and go, okay.
Correct.
these
The
all
report was
familiar.
sent out a month ago, so it
Okay.
is the same report. So just overall, it was quite a year for me to cut my teeth in this new role. There was a lot of water policy. But just to give you an overview of kind of what it's like in the legislature, and this is the case every year. This year, they introduced a little over 2,900 bills. 893 of those were chaptered, 156 were vetoed, so that was about a 15% veto rate. Last year, it was about 14%, so the governor's obviously exercising his veto powers. There are about a little over 1,200, almost 1,250 two-year bills. Those are bills that can be acted upon depending on, they're going to be either acted on in January or later in the year, depending on whether they're in the first house or the second house. Our staff, we actually reviewed over 832 bills, and staff here provided analyses on about 341 of those. So like I said, we took positions on 14 bills, and those are the ones I'm going to walk through. So the first one is ACA 1. This is a constitutional amendment. It did actually pass with 2/3 in both houses. That's what's required to amend the Constitution. The bill is by Assemblymember Aguiar-Curry, and it deals with local government finance for affordable housing and other public infrastructure. This bill has been sort of been sitting there essentially for the last couple of years and trying to move through, and because of the 2/3 threshold, that's a high bar, but it was actually passed this year. So what it would do is it would lower the voter threshold for local government to increase special taxes from what is currently 2/3 to 55%. And included in the definition of public infrastructure is water and wastewater infrastructure. It also has provisions to deal with transparency and oversight requiring annual audits and the like. So that is the first one. Any questions about these?
So we tried this a few years ago
Yes.
and had quite the campaign run against it. Do you see the same political forces lining up on this come November?
Well, come November, so this would be, like you said, on the November 5th, 2024 ballot. As you'll recall, if you remember, we presented to you, there is a private citizens initiative, essentially what is called the Taxpayer Protection Act. I know that's not the actual name. It's kind of a misnomer. But this is basically this initiative that tries to change the rules for how local and state government can impose taxes, fees, and other charges, and we took a position in opposition to that. That will be on the ballot at the same time as this initiative. There is language in ACA 1 now that basically says that if ACA 1, if the votes in support of ACA 1, let's say, exceed those of the votes on the other initiative, then that initiative becomes null and void. So there are responses right now to try to deal with these issues, but this will be a topic of discussion, in the public media around these issues, which is going to complicate matters because it's going to be confusing, I believe, to the electorate. All right, any other questions on ACA 1, public finance? Okay. So the next category is water quality and PFAS. So this year, the legislature continued on this path of trying to advance legislation on source control and getting PFAS out of consumer products. We had a support position on 2 bills, AB 727 by Assemblymember Weber, which was going to ban the manufacture, distribution, of sale of PFAS and cleaning products by January 1, 2026, and then it had a separate date for floor finishes and cleaners, and that was going to go into effect in January 1, 2028. And the other one was AB 1423. This was a bill by Shivo that was prohibiting the sale of artificial turf that contained PFAS starting in January 1, 2026, and it also prohibited public entities like schools from purchasing or installing artificial turf containing PFAS, with some provisions for public schools that were already moving down that path that would have been grandfathered in. The governor vetoed these bills, which was a surprise to some of us, but in his veto message, he wrote that while he strongly supports the intent of the legislation, he was concerned that the state was not in a position to basically ensure the effective implementation of the bills, and that was because these bills in particular had not defined a state agency to oversee and regulate their enforcement. So he has directed, and he put this in his veto statement, the Department of Toxic Substances Control to work with the legislature and the authors to look at alternative approaches. So we think this is going to continue to be an issue next year, but this is now kind of where we're at this place right now to sort of look at how we take an approach to dealing with source control, which the administration supports, but how they do that is going to be under discussion. Is there any questions?
They wouldn't, I guess this is a question. They wouldn't, they can't revive this because it's been vetoed, but they could reintroduce it this year or?
They could reintroduce these bills.
Okay.
And as you know, over the years, they've been introducing legislation, which has actually been enacted. So I think within statute right now, they're going to have to look at all of this. Members could reintroduce this legislation, but I think through that process then would have to, because of the governor's veto message, engage with the administration on how we're going to regulate and how we're going to enforce this. So that's the issue. And one of the issues that has come up, and I heard it from the opposition side, was there are all these different, essentially PFAS thresholds that are now in statute for different consumer products. And what they don't have is consistency on how do they achieve and meet those from the industry side. So that was another issue that came up in the debate.
To that, I would say be careful what you ask for.
Yes.
And did the administration make it clear while the bill was progressing that they thought it should do that?
They did not.
Yeah.
They had not weighed in until the end when there was the governor veto.
They should study the fluorescent light bulb saga.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Any other questions on water quality? And of course, we will continue to bring bills that look at source control on PFAS to the board for consideration in a support position. So the next category is a big category, and this includes sort of what we put under the umbrella of water rights and water supply and resource management. And so it was obviously, as you recall, a very busy year in this area. There were 6 bills related to the subject matter. The first one was AB 30. We had a support position on this, and the bill has been chaptered. It deals with the atmospheric rivers research and forecasting. And basically what the bill does is it broadens the Department of Water Resources' use of this kind of information from the program to improve the forecasting for flood control and reservoir reoperations. And then it requires that DWR make that information available to the relevant federal, state, and local agencies. The next 2 bills in this category were by Assemblymember Diane Pappen, who was a new member this year. These bills seek to address water supply and resource management and the cost of water, of new water supplies. The first one, AB 754, if you recall, this bill is introduced, was a planning bill that essentially sought to address water supply shortages by requiring water agencies that get 50% of their total water supply from a single reservoir to develop what was a target water supply target storage supply curve, and then compare storage levels monthly to the curve, and then describe how they plan to operate the system, including carryover storage as well as recommended actions to conserve water, depending on whether you dropped below that target curve and certain hydrologic conditions. So we took an oppose unless amended position on that bill. We thought it was a step back from sort of how we are managing our total system supply. And we secured amendments to remove the requirements for automatic conservation measures, depending on the storage levels. And there was some language in there that was referencing water rights that we thought was problematic. But unfortunately, we had remained opposed to that bill because it still had this one-size-fits-all, and we were still trying to work on how do we take a better approach to sort of reservoir management. So we had been working with the author's office on that, but then the bill was held on suspense when it was in the Senate Appropriations Committee. So AB 755 was the other Pappen bill. This one has been chaptered. This bill requires public entities that provide retail water service to conduct a water usage demand analysis prior to completing a cost of service analysis. And so the purpose of this new law is really to shed light on who are the major water users that may be driving up water system cost. Originally we went in and we were working on this bill. We had an oppose unless amended position. We lifted our opposition because we were able to secure amendments to ensure that any new requirements would not subject the district to any kind of Prop 218 issues. Is there any questions about those 2 bills? All right, moving on to water rights modernization. So this was obviously a big topic for the board this year, and I had shared back in March that there were 3 water rights bills had been introduced. I'm going to talk about 2 first, and then I'll come back to the third. The 2 that we had ultimately taken an oppose unless amended positions on were AB 460. That was by Assemblymember Rebecca Bauer-Cahan from our delegation. And that bill would have allowed the State Water Board or a third party to petition the board to issue an interim relief order to apply or enforce what are really broad policy principles related to waste and unreasonable use of water, the public trust doctrine, and water quality objectives. It also applied interim relief to enforcing water right permits or licenses and measures to protect fish. And then the other bill, AB 1337 by Assemblymember Wicks, also from our delegation, sought to allow the Water Board, and this was as the bill was introduced, to adopt regulations to prevent waste and unreasonable use, promote conservation and recycling, protect public trust resources, and then require curtailments when water is not available under the diverter's priority of right. It also required reporting of diversions or use or the preparation of monitoring reports. So both bills, we had concerns because they would have allowed the State Water Resources Control Board to circumvent sort of due process protections that are really in place to uphold fairness and transparency and accountability, when the state's making any change to how the district, and any public water agency for that matter, is exercising its water right. So we had communicated these concerns to the authors, and we had been working with them and suggesting amendments. So then in May, I had reported, the bills were amended, but our issues had not been adequately addressed. And then in June, I brought the bills back to the board to take an oppose unless amended position. So AB 460, the interim relief bill, has been amended 3 times. But again, the amendments did not sufficiently narrow the scope of interim relief powers, nor did they go far enough to protect the due process provisions that I had talked about. And then AB 1337 was also amended several times, and it narrowed the scope of the bill to really clarify that the State Water Board had the authority to curtail any right, regardless of the year type, when water's not available under the diverter's priority of right, and required the board to adopt regulations for how they would issue curtailment orders. So the bills were ultimately held in the Policy Committee in Senate Natural Resources and Water because they didn't have the votes to get out of committee. We had still, maintained our oppose unless amended position, and we were having constructive conversations with the author's office, but they weren't moving forward. So they're now what are 2-year bills, and they could be taken up next year, but because they're over in the second house, they will probably be taken up in the second half of the legislative process next year because they don't need to be acted upon immediately. So any questions about the water rights legislation? There's one more bill I forgot to mention, I'm sorry. The third water right bill that I had mentioned was SB 389 by Senator Allen. We did not take a position on this bill. This bill was really around giving the board the authority, and it was enacted and has been chaptered, to investigate and ascertain whether any water right is valid. The board could now issue an information order in furtherance of an investigation. And the board can enforce a diversion of water if it's determined that that diversion is unauthorized as a trespass. They can enforce it as a trespass after the notice and opportunity for a hearing. So it has those due process provisions built in. So we never took a position on that. We had been monitoring that, but that is now law. So any questions on the water rights modernization? Then SB 361 is the last bill in this category. This was a bill by Senator Dodd. We had a support position on this. This is what I would refer to kind of as a data bill. It basically made several changes in the code to improve the state's stream gauge network, so requiring the state to kind of reactivate and install new stream gauges and implement recommendations that were in a State Water Board report on how to prioritize kind of the reestablishment of the stream gauge network. This bill actually was held on suspense in Assembly Appropriations. The reason for that was because the administration took action on this through the budget. And so there was funding in the budget for about $24 million out of general fund for 2023-24 this year to implement improvements to the stream gauge network. And then there's another $2.8 million to reactivate that network in the following year. All right, so moving on to wildfire and forest restoration. There was one bill in this category this year. This was AB 388 by Assemblymember Conley. This was a wildfire bill that directed the Department of Conservation upon appropriation to develop essentially guidelines for funding the implementation of what are regional wildlife implementation priorities, and to make block grants to do that, with state funding. This bill was actually held on suspense. And suspense files are a mystery. We don't necessarily know why they held it on suspense, but we presume it may have had something to do with the budget implications of this, or policies that were already in place and made this unnecessary. AB 735, this is a workforce development bill in this category, and this was a bill that was sponsored by CMUA, the association, California Municipal Utility Association. This bill was trying to create a high road utility careers program for California utilities, basically to connect individuals from underserved communities, with existing training programs. It was also a bill that was held on suspense, and we believe it was because of the fiscal impacts to the California Workforce Development Board and EDD. There were several workforce development bills this year. There were 3 others, and all 3 of those were held on suspense as well. So we think that was the reason. And then the validation bills, we bring these back to you every year. We had support position on those, and those were enacted. These are the bills that basically assure an insurance policy when there are any kind of errors that may occur, that may be inadvertent procedural errors or omissions made by public officials in any local and state government. So these were enacted, and these have now been put into law. These will actually help protect our bond ratings. So those are the sort of our priority bills. There were a couple of other bills that we listed in your packet that were bills of interest. And one was a budget bill. This was SB 122. This was signed into law, and it extended the deadline for the California Water and Wastewater Arrearage Payment Program to cover eligible customers. So it extended it from June 15, 2021 out to December 31, 2022. So it's now estimated and it made available an additional $600 million to allocate to what we call the QUAP program. This is to assist customers who were basically eligible, who had arrearages through this extended period of time. And EBMUD staff are actually planning now to submit an application, which is now open for this additional funding. And then the other bill was SB 3 by Senator Dodd. This was a bill that was also chaptered, and SB 3 expands the scope of the Water Shutoff Protection Act to apply protections to small community water systems, and those are systems with fewer than 200 connections. It also expands the requirements for water systems to provide deferred or reduced payments and alternative payment schedules, not just to those customers that are meeting certain conditions. There were health considerations that you would have to take in effect. It now applies if a customer comes to you and asks for these kind of deferred payment plans, you now are required to accommodate that situation, which is consistent with our policies. And it also expands the authority of the Attorney General to bring action in state court against any water agency for any specified action that's considered unlawful under the Act. So that completes, my overview of the mid-session report, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Director Coleman?
Thank you, Kathy. It's amazing that out of the 2,900 bills, we only had 18, I guess, thereabouts. How often do we share our comments, our issues, our concerns with, in particular, our upcountry partners? I mean, there's several bills that are like AB 735, AB 338, and SB 361 that our country partners are involved with it too. It's the Upper McCullough Watershed and so on. Do we reach out to those entities, whether it be Amador Water, Calaveras Water, so on, to see if they want to sign on to these bills?
We haven't specifically worked directly with those agencies. Not to my knowledge have we shared our comments with them. We have shared comments, obviously staff are involved in commenting on the bills, and then whether anything gets back through UMRA. I was recently approached by the Mountain Counties, I'm forgetting their complete name, the Mountain Counties Water Resources Association, I believe. They're an association that represents a number of these groups. And we had a conversation, we met at the party picnic and agreed, to share information with one another on policy positions and bills that may come up. So that's now kind of an opportunity for us to do that. And then, of course, a lot of these agencies are members of the associations, and they're aware through that process where we discuss these bills of where East Bay Med is usually, what our positions are.
Yeah, the Mountain Counties Association covers the entire state for the mountainous counties.
Yes.
I'm just wondering, in terms of political benefit, if we can get the UMRA members to sign on, or some of them to sign on, that may give us greater political credence for vote support we may need from those legislators in those particular areas. It's different than if you're going down to maybe Kern County mountains versus Amador or Calaveras mountains, because we have a nexus interest, less so than further north or further south.
Yeah, I'm happy to share through UMRA, where our positions are on certain bills. And then those agencies are certainly, we can have an open line of communication and talk about some.
Yeah,
what
because
those
UMRA
are.
meets only quarterly.
Where there's a nexus.
Yeah, where UMRA meets quarterly, whereas some bills may have a more, especially in the new session when it starts in January, may have more time sensitive to get support or opposition for that matter in hearings. And so I would hope that we would be reaching out to those entities who are our partners on many issues. They may not support always, but they may support, and it could be helpful in our endeavors.
Okay, happy to do that.
And I think you're aware, I mean, certainly on a lot of the recent wildfire bills, we've shared our positions with the UMRA.
We have shared our positions on that.
Yeah, I'm saying UMRA's great, but then drilling down to the two biggest agencies, water agencies, are Amador Water Agency and Calaveras County Water Agency within UMRA, excluding East EBMUD, obviously.
This is a state legislative question. It's a federal shutdown question.
Yes.
I'm
give an
just
update.
wondering if you have anything.
Well, that's a perfect segue, Director Young. I will segue into.
I didn't realize you were, okay.
I will segue into our legislative update unless there is any other questions on the past year. Okay. I'll jump ahead to the federal update because you've obviously been listening, to all the news and the reports. I think so much has happened at the federal level and particularly in the House since we last met, right? We had a motion to vacate. They removed Kevin McCarthy. We have a new, after I would say a fraught path, we have a new speaker from Louisiana, Mike Johnson, and he is actually now trying to advance, a two-part package of continuing resolution. They called it a ladder. They've called it now two parts, and they're now describing it as bifurcated. But essentially what they're trying to do is the government, they passed a continuing resolution. It expires at midnight on Friday. What they are doing now is they're trying to break it into two continuing resolutions. And essentially, what that would do is it extend spending for 4 government agencies through January 19th, I believe is the date. And then the other 8 would be extended through February 2nd. I believe I've gotten those dates right. They're meeting this afternoon in rules to discuss this. He has, I have been told as of this morning, lost more Republican votes because what is happening now is he is basically trying to pass a clean continuing resolution, which means maintaining 2023 spending levels. And doing that will garner Democrat votes. So it looks like, based on what we're hearing, coming out of, the Minority Leader Jeffries' comments and what he's saying is they will likely get the Democratic votes and they will probably move these continuing resolutions. And then Chuck Schumer over in the Senate has said, they would support this approach. Now, the president over the weekend, his office indicated they don't like this approach. They don't like creating 2 additional markers where they have to come back in January and in February to actually act on this again. It just creates more upheaval. And so it remains to be seen what what the president intends to do. So from my vantage point, I've been in conversations, weekly with, our consultant with Eric Saperstein back in DC. I am no longer predicting outcomes because we had been trying to predict outcomes. I'm not going to predict an outcome. I'm going to keep my fingers crossed that they pass a continuing resolution, whether it's 1 or 2, and we keep the government open for a period of time. If all of this crashes and burns and they can't get it out, then they may look at doing a 1-year continuing resolution, but that all remains to be seen. So it's quite fraught, it's quite disconcerting, and it's very disruptive to the process right now. And it's disconcerting to watch just how dysfunctional, Congress has become.
So this isn't so much a question for you as it is a question for Andrew and Clifford. For those, in the worst case scenario, for those individuals that get impacted financially, either benefit checks or job I mean, they're not working, whatever. Are we, can we put out, if it happens, can we put out, some kind of messaging to folks about, I mean, I know we're not doing shut-offs and all of that, but is some kind of message of support, recognition of hardship? I mean, I don't know what
Yeah,
the
I mean,
right, what the
certainly,
right messaging is.
I think in the
but-
past, when this has happened, we work with the customers
Right.
who called us and contacted us and they had hardships. I don't believe we put out a message. Andrew, is that true? I don't remember a message going out, but I think we work with those customers.
Yeah.
It's been a few
Definitely
years.
are willing to work with any customers that, have any type of hardship. I mean, we do put information on the website. I mean, that we put a lot of information about CAP and other support program that we have available. Again, but any individual that has problems or, hardships, we definitely want to work with them and speak to them.
I understand that there are organizations that are providing resources for federal employees who are exposed to this uncertainty. So we may be able to work with a few points of contact rather than, waiting for the aftermath to scatter plot after the fact. So that in the event that we do have a high amount of customers with the uncertainty about what's happening this month or in the future, but eventually do have secure jobs and will be able to pay us back. I would encourage making those connections with those support organizations sooner.
Yeah.
We could do that.
Yeah, and we definitely look for those opportunities.
Okay, just kind of closing out on sort of the federal side, of course, the other thing that happened was the passing of Senator Feinstein, and then the governor kind of surprised everybody by appointing Senator LaFonza Butler. She has obviously made it public that she's not intending to run to fill the seat, but will complete the late Senator Feinstein's term. So it is still a three-way race, and there will be, in March, the presidential primaries, which will shed more light on where that is headed. Her office has been actually starting to make some staff changes to support her committee assignments. So it will remain to be seen, what happens to Senator Feinstein's staff and where they land. So going back to sort of a state update, I'll try to be very quick here. The legislature will reconvene on January 3rd. We now have, essentially, we have new leadership in both houses. And that's likely to lead to changes in the committee, in both the composition and committee chairs. So Senator Mike McGuire, who is from the North Bay and the North Coast, is now the pro tem designee, and he will replace the current pro tem, Toni Atkins, who's held the position since 2018. And she terms out at the end of next year. So this was sort of setting up a transition. He will serve as pro tem until 2026, because that's when he terms out. So he leaves open a pathway for other sort of prospective members who are interested in that position. Some background about him, he grew up in a family farm in Sonoma. His legislative priorities are really focused on wildfire management and mitigation issues, renewables, offshore wind, and also fisheries and aquaculture. He chairs the Joint Committee on Fisheries and Aquaculture. The actual transition has not been announced, so we don't actually know when that'll take effect and how that will impact the Senate committees. And then in the Assembly, as you know, we have a new speaker, Speaker Robert Rivas, and he is from the Central Coast. So we interestingly have, two members, now leading both houses from the Central Coast and the North Coast, which is a shift from Southern California and sort of the more, urban areas. So Speaker Rivas, he took over last June after a 6-month transition period. So I think we will see more changes in the Assembly because he had a longer transition period and because there are also more new members in the Assembly that came in last year. So there's an expectation. There were 22 new members last year, so that's a very large class. So we keep hearing we'll announce the new chairs very soon. But in the meantime, there's a hiring freeze in certain offices until they make some of these changes. So it could be a slow start to the new session as, they make the committee chair changes and then they do some of the staffing up. The other thing is 2024, as you obviously know, and we've talked about, it's an election year. So again, we're going to experience more turnover the following year. There's 16 vacant assembly positions and 12 vacant Senate seats. And then lastly, just in terms of the budget outlook, it's really uncertain right now. The economic outlook is uncertain. The revenue projections are coming in lower for October. They were 40% of what they had projected for this time, for October in 2023. Some of that has to do with the delay in filing the 2022 taxes to, I believe the deadline is now this Thursday. But that means basically we're probably looking at another budget shortfall. Last year, they had to close a $30 billion gap, and we don't know what it will be this year. So it's going to make, the governor's budget, which has to come out, in January, it's going to make that actually very complicated. And so it means we're going to have a very active budget year that'll, again, probably run, into the May revise and then into the summer. So that completes my updates, and I'm happy to take any questions.
And as you were speaking, the House passed a plan to avert the government shutdown.
All right, now we got 2 more stops. I get to the Senate and the President. Exactly. All right, any questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Next, we have the appointment of an ad hoc committee to negotiate amendments to employment agreements with the general counsel and the general manager. Earlier today, the board met in closed session to conduct performance evaluations of the general manager and the general counsel. Consistent with past practice, the board will consider appointing 3 members of the board to serve as an ad hoc committee as the board's representatives in negotiating any amendments to the employment agreements with the general manager and general counsel. I will now call for 3 volunteers or nominees to be appointed to a committee.
I volunteer.
And I will volunteer.
I'll volunteer. I didn't mean to have that pause in there. I just kind of slipped in somehow.
Is there a motion
I mean,
to?
that's in keeping with past practice, right?
Yes.
That's right. Yeah, we've often had
Vice
a,
president and past president.
we have often had an ad hoc committee system to take the feedback presented during the evaluation and negotiate the contracts as provided by the Brown Act. Is there a motion to appoint those 3 individuals to an ad hoc committee that will review both contracts?
I would gladly move that
I'm sure you would.
off my desk.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, moved by Director Linney, seconded by Director Patterson.
Move my
Oh, excuse me.
Marguerite.
Moved by me, you seconded by.
Thank you. Moved by Director Young, seconded by Director Patterson to appoint Directors Linney, President Katz, and Vice President McIntosh to the ad hoc committee. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Motion carries.
Andy, can you at least let people know what the process will be? So that people expect, including for both Clifford and Derek, but everybody here.
Sure. The process is that the ad hoc committee will review the information provided by Human Resources, and based on the information that occurred in closed session, we will engage with the general manager and general counsel regarding issues for updating and presumably extending their contracts, and then we'll report back to the board of directors in closed session, and then we'll the board will then act on the ad hoc committee's recommendations, and if we are able to negotiate an extension to the contracts, the ad hoc committee's work may conclude, and then revised contracts would appear on the board's agendas in open session.
Okay.
So we will now move on to item number 13, the general manager's report.
Thank you, President Katz. So as we discussed at the budget workshops, We plan to issue around $275 million in water revenue bonds and $25 million in wastewater revenue bonds in February or March of 2024. When we issue bonds to the public markets, there are certain disclosure requirements as well as federal security laws and anti-fraud rules that we must comply with. We have a representative from our outside bond counsel firm here today to provide a brief overview of the disclosure responsibilities for the district and its board members and officers. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Jonathan Cruz of the law firm Stradling, Yoka, Carlson, and Routh.
Thank you. It's Jonathan Guz. No worries. So good afternoon, members of the board. Thank you for taking the time today for this presentation. I will be providing a brief presentation regarding the disclosure responsibilities of the board under federal securities law. So today's presentation will cover the standards under the federal securities laws that apply when approving the official statement in connection with a bond sale or otherwise making public statements, the duties and responsibilities of board members in approving the official statement in connection with a bond sale, SEC enforcement and why compliance is important, and disclosure controls to mitigate the exposure. And if during the course of this presentation you have any questions, feel free to ask me them. So under federal securities law, governmental issuers are largely exempt from a bulk of the federal securities law. However, the anti-fraud provisions are applicable. So what that means is when a municipal issuer releases information to the public that is reasonably expected to reach investors in the trading markets, that disclosure is subject to the anti-fraud provisions. And as you'll see later on, this applies not only to materials that are prepared in connection with a bond sale, they also apply to statements that could reasonably believe to reach investors. So the types of disclosures where the federal securities laws apply. So municipal issuers are under no obligation to speak to the market. However, if they elect to do so, the statements made to the market and to the public need to be complete and accurate. And the types of instances whereby you'll see a governmental entity speaking to the market will be in connection with a bond sale, as was noted in the introduction. And for the district, they prepare an offering document and provide some material information about the bonds to be sold, but also there's an Appendix A that provides all the material information about the district relating to its finances and operations. Another instance whereby issuers speak to the market or in connection with their continuing disclosure filings, the district in connection with its bond offerings enters into an agreement whereby on an annual basis it will provide certain updates to the operating and financial information that was in the offering document, as well as providing its annual audit and certain other updates. And then as we'll discuss in greater detail later on, there are other contexts where the SEC has said that the anti-fraud provisions apply to statements made by municipal issuers. These include speeches and presentations by officers and officials, but also includes information in reports submitted to boards, as well as information that can be found on an issuer's website. So the disclosure standards that are applicable to municipal issuers that have the anti-fraud provisions, the primary standard is found in Rule 10b-5. And Rule 10b-5 provides that it shall be unlawful for any person to make any untrue statement of material fact or to omit to state a material fact necessary in order to make the statements made in light of the circumstances under which they were made not misleading. So the first part of that's pretty straightforward. You can't make any untrue statement. The omission part is the part where it can get a little trickier. Sometimes that is represented by just the failure to make a statement of a material fact. Other times, though, it can be a little more nuanced, whereby there are statements in the document where little additional context is necessary to make sure that they're not misleading. And the other areas of federal securities law that contain anti-fraud provisions that are applicable to municipal issuers are the Exchange Act. And for a violation of federal securities law under the Exchange Act, there needs to be a showing of intent or recklessness. And then there are also anti-fraud provisions under the Securities Act, and this has a lower bar whereby the SEC will just have to show that the issuer acted negligently. So it's, they should have known at the time. And you'll see in their enforcement actions, they oftentimes bring violations under the Securities Act because it's a lesser standard. So the materiality standard for federal securities law has been developed primarily through case law involving public corporations. However, there have also been, the standard materiality refined through SEC enforcement actions involving municipal issuers, as well as SEC staff legal bulletins, which aren't binding law, however, provide indications of the SEC's thinking on current matters, as well as matters that may be subject to future enforcement actions. So the materiality standard that's been developed in case law is, information will be deemed material if there's a substantial likelihood that a reasonable bond investor or prospective investor would consider it important in making an investment decision, or if viewed by a reasonable investor, the information will have having significantly altered the total mix of available information. And then when it comes to future events, it's a weighing of the likelihood of the event versus the magnitude. So for instance, you're looking at something in terms of whether or not you're going to disclose a future event. You'll look at the likelihood it's going to happen versus, what will be the financial impact or the impact on operations. And it's important to note in the SEC, when they bring forth their enforcement actions and conduct their investigations, they look at things with the advantage of hindsight. So they're able to say, you should have done, X, Y, and Z. And it's more difficult to make those decisions in real time.
Can you give some examples to this? I'm having trouble really understanding this with, because it all sounds like legalese and everything without some sort of examples.
Sure. In terms of times where just, let's say for purposes of the upcoming disclosure, if there's some type of regulatory development that's coming in the future that may require the district to expend additional costs in terms of meeting those regulatory requirements, that's something that would be deemed material and that should be in the mix. Similarly, you may have something that will have it.
So EPA may change laws with regard to some of the elements, the byproducts or something.
Right.
We may have to spend money on this, disclosing that.
Right, yes, that goes into the future kind of disclosure. I mean, situations too, where also you may have certain regulations that may alter the impact of consumers in terms of their consumption. Things of that nature are, deemed material.
Okay, that helps a lot.
So the duties and responsibilities of a governing body in connection with the authorization of a disclosure document were largely born out of the SEC's report and guidance in the wake of the Orange County bankruptcy. So in the report that the SEC prepared following the bankruptcy, it included that a public official may not authorize disclosure that the official knows to be false. Nor may the public official authorize disclosure while recklessly disregarding facts that indicate that there is a risk that the disclosure may be misleading. So the upshot of that is that members of a governing body need to exercise proper care and supervision not to make a material misstatement or omission and to prevent material misstatements and omissions appearing in the materials prepared by staff. Also, the report went on to provide some recommendations of what the Board of Commissioners could have done. And they identified, the steps that were appropriate in the circumstances were for the members of the board to become familiar with the disclosure and then ask questions of the officials, employees, and other individuals involved in the preparation of the disclosure. And from the SEC's point of view, the review by the board is important because they take the position that board members are uniquely positioned to have material information regarding all aspects of the organization, and they're informed of significant developments from a broader perspective. And when you're presented with the draft of Appendix A for purposes of your approval, if you see something in there and have any questions, you should reach out to the finance and treasury staff, and general counsel as appropriate. And the SEC has also provided that in certain limited instances, an issuer can rely upon the guidance of their consultants, so that would be our office, municipal advisors, feasibility consultants in certain contexts. But underlying that, they've made clear that an issuer cannot delegate its responsibility entirely to those consultants, and at the end of the day, it is the issuer's document, so they will be responsible for its content. So the SEC has gone on to say that not only are the statements made in connection with a bond sale, your preliminary official statement, your continued disclosure, that those are subject to the anti-fraud provisions. Also, statements made by a governmental entity that can be reasonably expected to reach investors in the markets that may be material are also potentially subject to the anti-fraud provisions. And these statements include public statements, speeches, interviews, website postings, social media, information included in investor roadshows. They had a recent bulletin that also identified information in certain reports prepared and delivered to a board. So they've made it clear in recent years that these anti-fraud provisions provide also apply to statements outside of bond financing. So SEC enforcement actions. So when the SEC believes there may be a violation of federal securities law, they will take steps and conduct an investigation, and the end result will be an enforcement action. As noted before, they have several different areas of law under which they can bring a violation, and they're able to usually find strict compliance or strict liability for compliance by virtue of kind of the lower standard in the Securities Act. In the past decade or so, they've really ramped up activity in terms of an increase in enforcement actions, as well as increasing financial penalties against issuers, as well as the individuals involved. Have brought criminal charges in egregious cases, and then have also taken the steps of even banning individuals who are involved and have violated federal securities law. So the consequences of bad disclosure, I won't list them all, but generally just it's expensive. You'll have to pay for the cost of the SEC investigation and hiring individuals and consultants to deal with that. You'll face potential large borrowing cost increases by virtue of issues accessing the capital markets, and there may be other remedial measures that are required pursuant to the SEC that would potentially cost money. And in its enforcement actions, the SEC has laid out several things that an issuer can do that they believe will mitigate the chances of a federal securities law violation. Those include having written policies and procedures, engaging in regular disclosure training, seeking advice of individuals who are your consultants when appropriate, and then also updating disclosure practices to make sure that they're in line with the current guidance from the SEC. And that takes us to the end of the prepared remarks. If there are any questions.
This is just a presentation as we are about to embark on more bond sales to support our capital program, to make sure that the Board of Directors is fully informed about our compliance obligations, both as individual board members as well as what representatives of the agency are held to. So that was the reason why we received this presentation. And are there any other comments before we wrap up?
Appreciate it. Definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Finally, just attached is the monthly report, and at your place is the Speakers Bureau. Can I answer any questions you may have?
I don't have any questions. I'd like to comment. I think we got really good press on the salmon return, so thank you on that. That was good news and good to promote. I also like, and I don't remember seeing it so laid out before, under the customer and community service, by date, the activity. That's good information, so to have at hand, just to go through the pages here.
Sorry, I missed what you were asking for.
Nothing. I was just saying, thank you. Good press, and I liked how it read on the community.
Okay.
That mask, you can't.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think the district has actually done the press release yet for the fish returns.
Well, it's been, they may not have, but I've seen media on it.
It's been reported by others, and we do plan to issue a press release Thursday morning, as well as afterwards doing some social media outreach. And before it goes out, I will send to you by email the press release.
Well, the press I've seen, even if we didn't send it out, has been very good, so thank you.
Yes.
All right, we move to reports and director comments. The minutes from the October 31st, 2023 Special Finance Administration Committee were included in the agenda materials. We will now receive an update from this morning's Planning and Sustainability Committee meetings. Yes, let's start with Planning, Director Linney.
All right, we heard two reports today in the Planning Committee, one on the East Bay Mud's creek restoration partnerships in the East Bay. Very interesting. I've encouraged staff to find some time on our agenda for the rest of the, excuse me, are you listening, John?
Yes, I was listening to your Planning Committee update.
I asked that maybe have this presentation for the whole board so John could hear it too. But great takeaways, creek restoration projects, a lot of stuff that I didn't realize that we're doing that I think is both good news for our work to restore our environment and fishy habitat and work with another opportunity to work with the community to do these things. The second report was the Lower McCollum River relicense project, the FERC relicense project. Key takeaways that this is going to be an ongoing process for a number of years here, and that we'll be coordinating with quite a number of other agencies and making that work, getting our FERC license renewed. It's a 30-year license, is that right? 50, yeah. It was a long time. So, all right.
Thank you, Director Linney. Director Young?
Yeah, for the Sustainability Committee met this morning and had two items. The our annual greenhouse gas inventory, which is not for this year, it's for 2022. And in accordance with our adoption in September of the 2030 carbon neutral goal, the report sort of reflects that, even though it's reporting on 2022. We are on track to hit that. This is previously we've been quite a bit below the curve for the most part. This year we were pretty darn close to the line, but I think part of that reflects that it's we're getting to the point where some things are harder. We got the low-hanging fruit, and now we're working on the things that are more challenging, and had a good, really helpful disaggregation of the differences on the wastewater and what the other sources are of greenhouse gases, and encourage folks to look at the PowerPoint and the staff report. We spent a fair amount of time talking about our progress towards ZEVs and had a helpful public comment from Eric Larson advocating for support for carpooling to our district facilities, which are away from BART and easy walking, biking distance. The second report, which was done with an incredible speed because we only had 7 minutes left. We actually had 5 minutes, but we took 7. Was on the Resource Recovery Program, and again, continuing to do an outstanding job of producing renewable energy through our truck waste and anaerobic digestion gas to energy program that has had tremendous growth in this fiscal year. We also got a preview of the excellent work that's being done to reduce nutrient discharges, a little bit on food waste, a little bit on charging our vehicles from the energy that we create, employee vehicle charging, and Yeah, the hydrogen fuel station that is going in, that we are leasing to another company to put in a hydrogen fueling station on the wastewater treatment plant site. That was it.
Thank you, Director Young. Other items for future consideration, please submit those items to the general manager. And thank you if you have already submitted your written comments to the secretary. Are there any verbal director comments or reports? Director Linney.
So Director Patterson and I had a ward briefing this last week. Went really well. I got a lot of positive comments from people who attended, more than usual for some reason, or so it seemed. So I just wanted to make sure to thank the staff. Great job. Thank you for everybody who presented there and for the staff who pulled it together and sent out all the invitations and made sure people had food and everything there. It just came off really well. I just so happy that we're doing these award events. I know it's interesting because it's somewhat self-selecting. Some years I've had half the city staff from the city of Alameda there. I didn't see any of them this time, which is not a criticism, just that I felt, I guess, up to date, but people from a lot of other agencies, and I just think it's a great thing that we do.
I would join with those comments that were made. And one of the things I wanted to say about this year, it felt really, I don't know, I felt like people were really interested, listening, and on key. And the staff did a great job of presenting. And that sustained their attention. So when questions came at the end and after the meeting, they were not out in left field, they were in the right field, and we could direct them directly to somebody on staff who could take them further. It was a good connection. I spoke to Clifford earlier this week and commended him, and he was passing that on to staff. It was a great meeting, and I saw some people I hadn't seen in years, so it went real well.
Director Coleman.
Just real quick, I will be attending the Aqua Conference for the next meeting. I'll be down there the entire time. So we'll see how that works, calling in from a hotel lobby with the camera on. And I've been told there's some latitude in that with the Brown Act, but that's where I'm going to try and call in from a hotel lobby.
They might let you use the restroom.
I think I'd rather do the hotel lobby, Lisa.
We look forward to your virtual participation at the next meeting, and any other director comments? And then the next regular meeting of the board will be held on Tuesday, November 28th, 2023 at 1:15 p.m. This meeting is now adjourned.